How to draw water. Welcome back. If you don't know who I am, I'm a 22-year-old graphite and charcoal artist that specializes in hyperrealism with realism. Basically, I like to draw things to make them look like photographs, but at the same time, I don't want them to look like photographs. If that makes any sense. I'm teaching you guys everything that I know about drawing, so if you want to learn how to draw like this, please consider subscribing. Also, thank you guys so much for 5,000 subscribers. I really, really appreciate it. Now, I just finished my original drawing that's been lurking here in the background the past couple weeks. It's titled "The World's Moving, But I'm Not." And as you can see, there's a lot of water going on in this piece. So I figured before we move on from this drawing, it's the perfect time to teach you guys how I draw water. Now, water always looks really intimidating at first because it's super abstract. There's a lot of little dots and lines here and there, but I promise it's super simple and only takes a couple tools. And I'll teach you a couple ways on how I do it. So without further ado, let's go over all the tools that you'll need and jump into it. Ready? Let's begin. For graphite, we just want typical graphite pencils. I use the Faber-Castell 9000 series. You'll want 3 of them to make it easy: a light, medium, and dark. I like to use 2H as my light, HB is my mid, and 2B is my dark. Any tone lighter than 2H is unnecessary, and anything darker than 2B should be used with charcoal. For charcoal, we just want some sort of pencil. I use the General's pencil, preferably the soft variation. It applies much easier and is the darkest type in my opinion. You also need a charcoal stick with sandpaper. With this, you'll make charcoal powder by filing down the stick onto a piece of paper. This is one of, if not the most important tools. Starting off for our erasers, the Tombow Mono Eraser is used for more prominent highlights with sharper edges, hence the minute tip. The Faber-Castell Perfection 7056 is used for more subtle highlights with softer edges, mainly tone and value based. An electric eraser is used for the strongest of highlights. By pressing the button, the tip spins at a speed that allows almost anything to be erased. It's a tool that I recommend to anyone, and one that once you have it, you don't really know what you do without it. The kneaded eraser can be shaped to your liking and is great for more abstract, unpredictable highlighted textures. Finally, the Faber-Castell dust-free eraser is used to clean up any smeared charcoal. It's not required, but incredibly convenient, and I highly recommend. As you can see, erasers are vital to the detailing process, which is why we have the most tools in this category. Any sort of makeup or art brush will be used for most of the blending. I personally use the IPC1 by Dynasty brushes. I recommend you use some sort of makeup brush since they blend the smoothest from my experience. We'll use a blending tortillon for blending the smaller graphite details. Lastly, a soft tissue, preferably Kleenex, is best when trying to achieve a very smooth, uniform tone. These 3 tools will be able to blend anything we'll ever need. Looking at our miscellaneous items. The Faber-Castell Polychromos color pencil is fantastic at achieving the same dark tones of charcoal in small, hard-to-reach areas where charcoal cannot get. A white gel pen can be used at the end to strengthen and make the brightest highlights shine even more. However, it's not necessary. I personally like the Jelly Roll pens. Lastly, any stiff brush is great for wiping away all those shavings that get in the way. Again, not necessary, but very convenient. For my sharpeners, I use the KUM Magnesium Sharpener for my graphite pencils and the General's All Art for my charcoal pencils. The brand doesn't really matter though. What matters is that you have separate sharpeners for your graphite and charcoal pencils because they actually sharpen differently. For my paper, I use the Strathmore 500 series plate or smooth 3-ply. Because of how expensive it is, if you want to use the 400 or even the 300 series, you can. The most important thing is that you use Bristol paper that is smooth, not vellum. Vellum does not allow you to achieve the smallest of details like smooth can due to the vellum's tooth. Now that we've gone over every single tool that I use, let's begin. Okay, as per usual, we have the grid here, 4 inches by 3 inches. Now, if you want to know how I make my grid, you can check out my most recent tutorial. But for now, we have the grid on there and we have the sketch. Do not bother sketching out every single little line of the water, like all in here and everything, because as long as you have your grid and you have the basic outline of the entire section of the water, you're good to go. I chose this little screenshot of water because it's not just your average typical droplet. It seems to be a little more complicated than that. So I thought it'd be a really good practice to show you how I break it down. Typically, the first step of how I draw things, as you know if you've seen my other videos, is the base. However, there really is no base here because if you squint your eyes, it blends into the background. So we just have shadows and highlights. And of course, I like to start with the shadows. And with water, I like to start with everything that's black. So you're gonna look at the reference and I'm gonna see just the areas that are pitch black, which are very distinct. There isn't a lot of super smooth blending lines with water. A lot of the times the highlights and the shadows have very distinct sharp edges. So with the Polychromos color pencil, I'm going to just fill in all the black areas. If you want to sketch out every single line before you fill in, you can, but you can see here, to fill everything in, you kind of have to outline it. So we'll kind of just be doing the same step twice. It doesn't have to be perfect. I consider water an abstract texture, meaning that you can pretty much make it up as you go and no one will be able to tell the difference because it changes shape and form literally every millisecond. Anything that you would classify as black or the next thing to it. Some little lines in here. You gotta make sure you have a sharp tip for this type of stuff because a lot of it is just outline work. I will reiterate that having the grid is so important because it's the only way that I'm able to somewhat accurately get all of these darks in place without having to sketch every single line out beforehand. So while I do say you don't have to, sketch the whole thing out, you need the grid. Now in the section I'm working on right now, you can see that while it is a darker patch, there are some black tones and then some not as black tones. If you want to make it super easy on yourself, you can color this whole thing in black. It's not going to be too different, but right now I'm trying my best to do just the black areas. And then the next step is to fill in the areas that aren't as black. But if you want to color this whole thing in and just skip the next step, that's fine too. Now some of these lines, like the ones I'm doing right now, could go either way. They could be black, they could be one tone lighter. The tones are ultimately up for you to decide. Now this down here is very abstract, a lot of little lines. I like to improvise. If you don't want to improvise, you can go line by line. That's what the grid's for. If you want to, you can break your grid up into smaller squares. You could do 1/2 inches if you'd like. That's a little excessive. I don't think I've ever done that, but I know a lot of artists that do. Forgot this up here. But the reason I forgot is because, again, it doesn't really matter. You could do double the detail, you could do 1/2 the detail. It's still gonna look like water. It really just depends on how detailed you want it to look. Now there are some blacks over here, but let's do the droplets for later. Okay, we're done with the blacks. Now we're gonna go one step down to a darker mid-tone. You could use 2B for this, but honestly, I like to make it simple and I like to use just HB. It's a typical mid-tone that's super versatile. If you press hard enough, it can become a darker tone, but if you press light, it can just be a mid-tone. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in the same exact thing we just did with the blacks and then find those lines that aren't as black and just do the same thing. So immediately the first thing I notice is the outline. Mainly, a lot of these midtones are right here in this patch. It's basically like a coloring book. We made the outline with the polychromos. Now we get a lighter shade and we just fill in. Right now I'm improvising a majority of the lines. Now you can see there's some sort of lip up against the edge right here. We did a little bit of the outline with the black, but we're just gonna make it a little more prominent. Again, try not to do any shading. We're just outlining. Like all of this in here is gonna be shading work, which we won't even use a pencil for actually. I recommend for a very abstract ripple, like the one I'm working on right now, to just color in up against the blacks that we made. You guys know I love charcoal and I recommend it for almost everything, but if we can avoid using charcoal at all costs with water, we probably should. While it is a super complicated texture, it's a very clean one. And if we can avoid some of the smearing of charcoal, I think that's the best case scenario. Okay, there we go. We have all the shadows and the darks in place. Now, typically we would move on to the highlights, but all the highlights here are just the white of the paper. We have dark tones, we have mid-tones, and then we have the white of the paper. Now, some of the droplets have reflections of a light source, which we can use a gel pen for, but over here, we don't have to worry about any highlights because it's just the white of the paper. Now we're going to move on to the lighter tones, which is all shading work. I highly recommend using blending stumps or the tortillons. Now, believe it or not, these two tortillons are from the same pack. This one is just very used and this one's brand new. I recommend one like this that has a dollar tip and already has some charcoal on it. And then I recommend a new one that has a finer tip. We'll begin with the one that already has some charcoal on it. Now, if you don't have one that has charcoal on it, just dab it in some charcoal powder, move it all around. Now we're just going to go top to bottom and fill in basically the only tone we have left, which is the very light one. Make sure to go along the outline. Now the dirty tortillon that I'm using right now is gonna be best for the more bulkier areas, like this lip. I definitely don't recommend doing any fine detailing with it. We'll use the clean one for that. You can see I'm blending some of the line work we already did. That's just to soften some edges. Now don't just go over this whole thing and color it in, but I would here and there go up to like a big area like right here, kind of just pull away from it, create a few softer edges. Switch over to the cleaner one, and because there's nothing on the tip, I would go into the darker areas and just kind of coat it a tad bit. You can see I got a little bit on there, and then have fun with this step. I'm very loosely following the reference, doing all the skinnier line work in here. Again, how hard you press does matter. Some of these lines are a tad darker than the others. You don't have to apply any more charcoal, you can just press a little harder. But be careful, because if you work the paper too much with a tortillon, you can actually tear it a little bit, which always gives a horrible, horrible texture that is really hard to cover up. So you can experiment, but don't look back too much. There really is no technique to this. I'm just holding it like a pencil and rubbing it back and forth. Again, if you run out of any on the tip, just go up to this little deposit that we designated up here, grab some, and then go back in. I'm not even looking at the reference right now. I'm honestly just having fun with it. Also, sometimes your grid lines can get in the way. I just take the dust-free Faber-Castell eraser, which is by far the best eraser I've ever used. I'll just get in there and just get rid of that line. And honestly, that's it. You can tinker with it as much as you want, but that's the gist of it. Fill in all the blacks first with the polychromos, then go in with all the mids with a pencil, then add all the light tones and all the shading with the blending tortillons or stumps. Now, I think it looks done, but if you want to add highlights, we'll do that after we do the drops. Now for the droplets, it's about the same exact steps, just a little easier. So again, we always start with the darks, and you can see, especially these up here, they have black outlines, so we're gonna fill them in. Now, as you can see, they don't go the whole way around. Now make sure you're doing just not one uniform line going the whole way around. I see that a lot and it looks awful. Making just a black circle that connects the whole way around is like the #1 way to make it look not realistic. This black outline right here is thick up top right there, thins out a little bit, it gains some weight at the bottom, and then it disappears. And having a really sharp tip is really crucial for this. I need to sharpen mine, but I'm being ignorant right now. Now this one's a little wonky. We're gonna just have to follow the steps that we did previously. The abstractness definitely scares a lot of people that have never done it before, but right now we're only focusing on the blacks. And when you break it down like that, it makes it a lot easier. Good enough for me. Okay, sharpen my pencil, going back down. Okay, now that we have those, honestly, we don't really have to do any of the midtones. Now this is a judgment call, and it depends on your reference. If there are some droplets that you think need some of the midtones to help blend out those blacks, you can do it. But for me, I honestly just see the black and then some light tones that blend into the white of the paper. So I'm gonna grab my tortillon and just blend as softly as I can. I always go the darkest to the lightest. So I'll start near the black and lift up off the paper. This drop here might look better with some midtones because it's a little more complicated. So we'll return to this one. But these down here do not need it. Okay, there we go. You can see there's some little circles around here. You can just add those with the tortillon as long as it's sharp enough. Just have some fun with this step. Now, like I said, some of those will look better with some midtones. So I'm gonna grab my HB, help strengthen these edges. Keep in mind, water will always have a sharp edge unless it's out of focus. So while it is a softer texture, there should be a definite edge on every single part. Now, if you want to add some highlights, we can. Now, if there are highlights that are brighter than the white of the paper, the only way to achieve those is to use a white gel pen or any sort of a white acrylic paint. So if you want, just go in with the white gel pen. I'm just going to add some highlights in the whiter areas. I don't find this step necessary, but I always say the higher the contrast, the better it looks. And this definitely does help with the contrast, so I don't think it hurts. The goal of this step is to just make the areas that are the white of the paper pop. And there you have it, how I break down a super abstract texture like water. The reference I chose was really intimidating at first, but when you break it down by doing the blacks first, midtone second, and then touching it all up with the blending stumps, it becomes an easy and super fun thing to do. Now, I'm also going to show you how to add water drops to an already completed section. And it's super simple. First, all you need is the Faber-Castell Perfection 7056, the HB pencil, and then the gel pen. Start off with the Perfection 7056, find where you want to add the drops. We're going to go down here, and then just in a circular motion, create the outline. I think right there is good. We'll add one over here, and then one more down here. Make sure it's a nice soft circle. Then grab your HB pencil, create a super soft outline. Now, this is the important part. Make sure you know where the shadow's supposed to go. You can see that the highlights are right here. That means the light source is most likely hitting down this way. Thus, the shadow should be behind or south of the drop that we made. Just on this side, I'm going to create a nice little shadow. And then up top here, I'm just going to darken it just a tad bit. Let's do that again with the other two. And then just blend a little bit down on the opposite end. Then for the finishing touch with the white gel pen, add 1 to 2 dots up towards the light source. There you go, it's really that simple. 3 tools later, you have water drops on an already completed section. It's important to note that we did no outlining with the polychromos like we did in the earlier tutorial. And that's because we don't want any lines darker than the other shadows already in the piece. If we would have outlined with this pencil, it would have been darker than all the shadows right here, and it would have looked like we added it in later, which we did. You never want to go darker than what's already here, and you would never want to go lighter than what's already there. With outlier water drops, subtleness is key. There you have it, a few different ways on how I draw my water. Hope you enjoyed the tutorial, hope you found it useful. Let me know down in the comments what tutorial you want to see next. If you want to see what I draw next, head over to my Instagram or my TikTok. I post daily over there. I also go live on TikTok every weeknight. So if you want to come hang out with us, make sure to head over there. I'm selling limited edition prints of this drawing behind me on my website. I only made 22 of them. They are hand signed, hand numbered, 1-to-1 to the original. Archival quality, they're so nice. I'm so happy with how they turned out. And if you want to get one before they're gone, head over to my shop. If you want to take the tutorials one step further, you can head over to my Patreon. I post these tutorials 1 week early over there, and I'll give you one-on-one feedback every single week to make sure that you turn out to be the greatest artist that you can be. All links are down below. I think that's it, so I appreciate you being here, and hopefully we see you soon.